Welcome to the Global Design Forum, a thought leadership programme that celebrates design and the minds shaping its future. The forum is part of the London Design Festival and organised in partnership with SAP and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Today's session focuses on materials and how design can shape a circular future where there is no such thing as waste. My name is Sarah Douglas. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Wallpaper, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. Joining me are four design leaders, all pioneers in their respective fields: Paula Antonelli, Neri Oxman, Kjetil Thorsen, and Ivy Ross. Paula Antonelli is the winner of this year's London Design Medal and the foremost advocate for design in our time. She's Senior Curator at MOMA, creator of the seminal exhibition Broken Nature at Milan's Triennale, and co-founder of Design Emergency, a project with Alice Rawsthorne that explores design's role during and after COVID-19. Design Emergency are also guest editors of the October issue of Wallpaper, which comes out Thursday and will be available to download for free. Neri Oxman has been called a contemporary Da Vinci, an architect, designer, inventor, and professor at the MIT Media Lab. She's known for her material ecology approach, which brings together organic design, material science, and digital fabrication. You can find out more in Neri's MOMA exhibition, curated by Paola, which is on view until the 18th of October and available on the museum website. Kjetil Thorsen is a champion of environmental and social sustainability in the built environment and the founding partner of architecture practice Snohetta. Their output includes the 9/11 Memorial Pavilion in New York, the new San Francisco MoMA, and upcoming opera houses in Busan and Shanghai, as well as a series of materials research projects on recycled plastics and clay. And finally, Ivy Ross, as Vice President of Hardware Design at Google. She's at the forefront of Silicon Valley's quest for sustainability. Over the past 4 years, Ivy has launched more than 30 products that have established Google's tactile, colourful, and bold design aesthetic. And she announced last year that the tech giant will be including recycled materials in all its hardware products from 2022. Last night, the LDF held a virtual medals ceremony. Dame Ellen MacArthur won the Design Innovation Medal. And in her acceptance speech, she said that design is the key. Design is that first decision. Design is the intention. We need to be designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in systems for as long as possible, and regenerating natural systems. And none of this can happen without design. And circular design, she said, is also key to rebuilding our future, especially after COVID-19. We have to rethink everything. We have to build a system that can run in the long term. She said, you, as designers, can fundamentally change the way the world pans out. She believes there are 160 million people that can influence the journey from linear to one that is circular and regenerative. So I think to the panel now, what roles do materials play in the circular economy?
Well, if I may just tell you very quickly, I have to say, yesterday's speech by Ellen MacArthur was so inspiring and so strong, because materials are not just the matter we make things with, but they also really influence behaviors, the behaviors of citizens that use the objects, and also the behaviors of corporations that make the objects, not to mention all the policy making. So as far as I'm concerned, I think the materials play a paramount role in not only the way we design, but also the way we live.
Yeah, I agree. So first of all, it's a pleasure, Sarah. Thank you for the introduction. And I am so happy to share a Zoom with my long time friend, Paolita. and of course with Ivy and Kjetil, and it's a pleasure to be here and talk about maybe the difference between the circular economy and circular design, if there is such. So I also agree, like Paula, and interestingly, Paula's one of her first exhibitions, if not the first, was Mutant Materials, which actually brought to the MoMA and to the world this notion that materials are less about the object that they embody and more about the system or the larger scale context at which they're mutated, created, generated, changed, transformed. And like Paula, I agree that the role of material in the circular economy, if you want to call it an economy, and we can debate that, is that I think of materials as the currency of that economy. And that currency can be exchanged for different rates. And those different rates, depending on the currency, have different implications for different people, different organisms, different regions in the world. And so when you think about materials as currency, similar to the way I think the food industry has been through a similar transformation from a resource to an indulgence to something that can be entirely designed, GMOs and such. I think materials are undergoing a similar transformation, and it's interesting to point out to its pros and cons. Currency can be great and can be completely destructive.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I totally agree with everything that's said so far, obviously, as I always am, in agreement with everyone. But there is an interesting debate coming up in following up the discussion on circular design and materiality, because it also opens up the discussion, what kind of materials, what is material? It does open up a much wider discussion on what is materiality per se. Is it necessary, something you can touch, or is it something you'd rather not touch? Depending on the situation, talking about humans and what we leave behind before we, leave this earth is also material. And I think we're looking at a holistic approach of material definition before we start really looking at the circular elements. So I think this debate is really opening up that discussion, I feel, simply because of the way it started off and some of the questions coming up later.
Yes, and I totally agree with everything that's been said, especially the fact that design is about solving problems, and I think this is one of the greatest problems of our time. And so it is up to us at the beginning of the creation cycle to be thinking about all of this. And material reuse, repurposing, and recycling are at the core of what that circular economy is about. And when used in these complex products, there can be challenging, challenges in making a great product and also being reclaimed from that product for future users. So for example, in our industry for e-waste in the electronics industry, it's less than 20%, and without collection and reclamation of some of these materials, it will be impossible to make a truly circular economy. Yeah. So we really need everyone participating in this, including the consumers, to be willing to return the materials. So it really is a complex problem, but one that we have to tackle.
I mean, I think that it is it is widening as a debate every day. I think one thing that comes up a lot is the idea, can all materials be circular in the way you're talking about them? And how does the material trade-offs, how can better decisions be made better? How can a designer know, even going back further from the first design decision, how do they know material A and material B? How do they know the difference? How do they know the repercussions of each material? And what research can be done to inform these decisions?
So
yeah, go ahead. No, Ivy, you do it because you have so.
Yeah, so we now have a process. I mean, you're right. These are some of the problems that have to be, processes have to be designed into the system, but we now have a form that when a design is being created, the designer fills out at every level, what could they have done? What choices could they have made that they didn't? And then the reasons why, so that we can go back with our material and engineering, material engineers and scientists and see if we can't overcome some of these challenges. And that way we can keep track. You know, we're making progress every single year, but some of these options are not even available yet in industry, but at least we have a record of what could we have chosen that would have been a better choice? Why didn't we choose it? And so therefore we know what we have to work on going forward.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Ivy uses the word choosing or choice or selecting materials. And I think there's, I love agreeing with everyone on the debate, but I also think we should disagree. So here I go. I think the main problem, I think, challenge that designers and architects have as a whole is that we're sort of succumbing to, or we're sort of trained and educated to material select as opposed to material create. And indeed, when you enter an engineering school, you know, you're handed the Ashby chart of material, and materials are to be selected from this chart, you know, like the table of the elements and other well-known tables. And the notion that materials can be designed entirely from scratch is still a moonshot to many of the organizations that run this circular economy, or this wannabe circular economy. In fact, it can never be circular. It can only be spiral or helical, but depending on how you define the circle. But I think that it's really important to say materials can be designed. And I think that it's interesting. I think the difference between Ivy's work and perhaps our work, and again, the comparison is unfair because, of course, the Ivy operates in a major organization, and my team currently operates, you know, in an academic institution, and so this I think nicely complements actually is our ability to say, okay, let's not separate between biomaterials and technical materials, the sort of well-accepted definitions of the circular economy. But let's take technical materials and say, what if all these technical materials were biomaterials? I mean, can circuitry be built using bioagents? Can we use all organic materials to create, you know, organic electronics? And then once you enter that kind of fusing between the technical cycle and the biological cycle, you have sort of the ideal circular economy that no longer separates between those two streams, if you may. And yeah.
And from the viewpoint of curating and educating and explaining to citizens, I have banned the word consumer from my lexicon because I think that words also influence behavior. So I always talk about citizens if I can. There's, just like Neri said, what is the circle? Is it a spiral? There's also this idea of speed. There are different speeds for different circles. And last year, together with a great team, and Neri was also involved, we did the 22nd Triennale di Milano. It was called Broken Nature. And the whole idea was to express to citizens, the citizens of Milan that are always thirsty for design, different strategies of either circularity or just very simple responsibility. Because, you know, organic materials do not all get back to the status that we would like them to get back to become earth again. And similarly, there are some materials that maybe some objects that were manufactured years ago that did not yet take into account the idea of being able to separate materials, to recycle them. Well, there are other strategies. And circularity means also stopping time or slowing down time. The idea that our grandmothers used to have a coat that lasts a last a lifetime, or a couch that lasts a lifetime. So to add to the complexity that Neri was adding on to Ivy, and that I'm sure Kjetil will also add on to mine, there's also this idea that you can be circular, at least mindful retroactively, even with objects that were not made in the way that one would make them today. And it's fascinating because to me, really, we have academia and small experimental company, gigantic corporation, and then the in-between, which is giving citizens their own critical tools to push back or push forward. I think that we are painting a very complex and revealing image of what circular means, whether in the economy or in material science or in design. Kjetil, to you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, really, by choice, yes, I think most materials could be, at least in a very, very short future, close future, be recyclable. But the question is, do we really want that? Mm-hmm. We've seen that recycling of plastic encourages production of virgin plastic. It's a very, very hands-on kind of situation, which we have to be extremely aware of. It's not said that everything that is recyclable also comes out at the other end as something environmentally friendly. And I think we need to take a stand when it comes to the big lobby of the building industry around the world, where these things are being pushed really, really hard. Lawmakers around the world are following up these lobbies and are actually doing exactly what they're told, as we've seen in many other parts of society. And that gives us a huge responsibility as designers, because we have to think before the others. We have to think before the lawmakers actually happen to make a law that is 5 years old and out of date. So we're looking at strategies that are much more in relationship to what do we use in the first place? How do we look at time and time scale? How do we engage bottom-up processes for a larger group of people in order for them to understand how they can reuse it or spend it over time? So all of a sudden, we're challenged with totally different approaches to architecture. We've started looking at reductionism as one of them. If you have one material and you can use it for everything in a building, say, like the churches of Lalibela in Ethiopia, which are all carved out of one piece of stone or mountain, all of a sudden, you're located in a position where you are in full control of everything that is recyclable with that element. But it's there for 1,000 years or 2,000 or 3,000 years, and all of a sudden, you understand that this transition is not about only technology and recycling and the gases being produced during recycling and how you deal with it. It's much more about early conscious choices. And the least we can do is to look at mechanically joined materials, for instance. I mean, it's such a low-hanging fruit. And there should be no issues in the design industry to start defining materials as something that is separable, at least. And then you can recycle whatever makes sense to recycle, and you do something else with the rest, which we don't know. But it's also to do, as I said, with the wider terminology of materials. I mean, human waste. And, we're looking at amounts of medicines in the fjords of Oslo, which simply is coming out of human waste. How are we going to deal with the environmental issues of our big waters and seas and oceans if all the fish are full of amphetamine? I mean, it doesn't make sense. And we're not getting to the point where the early choice of design is the driving choice. So it's really up to us how we sort of schedule out and draw up the decisions we make early in the processes we're dealing with. Because if we don't, there will always be someone else coming in and doing something different. And all of a sudden, we've passed 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 degrees before we know it. There is no way around this. I mean, we, and hopefully also the next generation will follow that up much stronger than we have. But we have to fight these lobbies. We have to fight the international building industry. We have to go back and look at how we're dealing with the choices that we make in design. And our suggestion is that once you understand the carbon footprint and embodied energies of anything at all before you start recycling it, then before that, reuse it.
I look forward to the day. I think a lot of this starts at the design school level. And that's why I'm actually thrilled with some of the work that Neri is doing and others, programs I'm seeing starting where, because I think scientists need to be working alongside of designers and totally changing the mindset of how materials are grown and thought about. So I think, yes, I'm in a large company and I'm doing what I can to first at least make the right choices while simultaneously being very supportive of universities and schools that are starting out with a different mindset, which I think is what it's going to take. And I do think the future is design and scientists working and a lot of multidisciplinary thinking to solve these huge problems.
Just one comment.
So I'm thinking of the, Kjetil. No, Kjetil.
No, go.
Oh.
Paula, go.
I keep on saying Kjetil instead of Kjetil. I even tested it before, Kjetil. Now, I was thinking, listen to everybody, I was thinking of the different components of this whole universe, because we have the citizens, we have the corporations, we have the material scientists, the designers, but we the distributors, the educators, but we also have the policymakers. And sometimes when we are in these kind of panels, we don't have that very, very important part represented. And I think we should start including politicians and policymakers so that they also start understanding how to take advantage of design and how to do their part. So for next time.
No, I agree with you. And, we know our responsibility as designers and architects. But we have to take into consideration that we're a fairly small group worldwide. I mean, I feel very small sitting up here in Oslo, but apart from that, it is and has been historically introvert. And so how do you break these boundaries and get to policymakers? How do you involve in the wider aspects of this? How do you deep dive into education as part of the circular thinking? From one generation to the next, all of a sudden you understand that's part of circular thinking. How do you open up and share the knowledge?
You agitate citizens. That's where it comes from. That's what I believe. When yes. People start demanding, that's what happens. They start demanding from politicians, they start demanding from corporations, and all of a sudden, using their vote and their wallet, they make their voice heard. And I feel that that's already quite happening.
Yeah, I agree with you. We need more of that to happen because that will put the pressure on everyone. I'm hoping this next generation really amplifies that even more. It's really necessary for change.
Yes. I think if we look at utopia and we would all be eating on gold plates, I don't really believe very strongly in the fact that that particular material would have made us much happier, even if everyone was eating on gold plates. So it's not the rare aspect of materials and how is it being used is not a sign of quality. So in essence, it's the value base that has to change when we choose things, not necessarily the availability of the material.
Would you say that there are materials that need to be phased out? Because I think, some people are kind of waiting for this new material to help us. But we have a huge amount of them in existence.
Although if we keep going at the rate we're going, we'll be out of materials the way we're draining resources, and we will have to create new materials. We'll be out of natural materials.
I think, Neri, with your work, nature being a constant source of knowledge, I think it's really fascinating. But how would you scale your methods? Because that could be what's needed, is that scale.
Yeah, just going back to Kjetil, the pyramids, which were incredible gifts for the architectural world, has also generated social trouble and many. We've lost many along the way in the construction of the Great Pyramids. So there's also critique of actions past, not only actions present as we look into the future. I think what I like about what you say is how you say it, is sort of your ability to capture the challenge, not as a sort of a set of singular problems that can be broken down into a protocol. But I feel like the way you're speaking about the challenge is like a brilliant designer, in that you sort of embody or accept or embrace the complexity of the situation. And in the spirit of complexity, there is no way to simplify but to embrace complexity in order to move through those challenges. So to your question, Sarah, you know, it's somehow, interestingly, in our perception, is this notion of the 7 material ages, right? We moved from stone to bronze to iron to steel to plastic, to the plastic age, to the silicon age, and we're now in sort of the materials design age. And in our consciousness, we think of those ages as mutually exclusive, as replacing one another, but in fact they're building, they're accumulating. There's this kind of cumulative effect of one material age on the other. It's not that we've replaced stone with steel, but we've added steel to stone, we've added plastic to steel, we've added silicon to plastic, and we're now adding biomaterials to silicon. And so that kind of cumulative effect creates a world in which there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. We know of the challenges. The opportunities, however, are in reshaping nature to a point where, and this is inevitable, so we may as well embrace, accept, and find find opportunities there that work both for the natural world and for the inanimate solid object world. And that is the opportunity to now biologically design materials, that are augmented with even CRISPR technologies, most recently using CRISPR to actuate materials that contain DNA that can actually impact the behavior of these materials over time, to a point where we are designing nature, to a point where you get a product, you don't actually know if the product has been grown or made. And that is a very scary, ethically charged, but also opportune moment for design and designers to kind of question, where is sort of the end of the made and the beginning of the grown, and what are the implications for the future of the manufacturing industry as a whole. And I think because sort of just taking us from the challenge to the opportunity, I think we are in the most incredible time in design, because designers have access to such high resolution tools that they can process, create high resolution behaviors spatially and temporally, in space and in time. And Paula's exhibitions actually prove that point by basically showing processes and products that can take us from the scale of the product to the scale of designing at the scale of red blood cells or nerve cell axons. And when you get to that scale in the design of product and architecture, by the way, you're going to laugh, and many will, but we'll get there. You sort of enter a completely new territory where you can design, building scale immune systems that can actually scan, that can possibly fix and mitigate systems like the built environment, the natural environment, and the biological environment. So bodies, buildings, and natural resources around them.
Wow.
That's what I said.
No, but of course there is a huge picture of opportunities within these complexities and challenges, and I think we do within the profession recognize them. But as I said, I'm afraid we're not too many, and maybe it's a growing sort of public that will understand and know how to deal with this. But what I find is that for every little step we're making, whatever the building might be, whatever the product might be around the world for the time being, it's like Stone Age thinking. It really hasn't moved that much. So however far we move, every time we manage to move one step further by making a material choice that actually does benefit, say, the environment, then someone will say, well, you know, how much difference did that actually make? So in the end, it's a very hands-on, difficult process. And in this respect, we're talking about artificial intelligence and materials. We're talking about the development of whatever a humanoid might look like. You know, we're getting into the perspective of analog and digital, and what does music in the end mean? You know, other than some sort of noise or repetition of things. But I still believe you're right. I still believe that the challenge, turning the challenge into a possibility, is a major factor for success.
I would like to bring in one scale of action that we haven't touched yet. Everybody that is right now in this panel is very high tech and has access to great technology, super advanced technology and manufacturing possibilities. I'm wondering whether the romanticism of looking at the so-called developing world to understand how to be circular is still valid also for you or not. You know, to me, it's incredibly interesting because composting is what my grandmother used to say. I always go back to my grandmother. They used to make the apricot jam and then also use the kernels. I mean, that kind of wisdom, is it only something we romanticize, or can we really learn to use it and to deploy it even in the high-tech realms that we operate in?
I think we should be looking at everything for solutions. And, you know, I've always thought that sometimes you look for the deviant in the culture that is solving a problem differently than everyone else. And it becomes like, oh my God, that's what we should all be doing. So I think that's a great point.
I think, Paula, whenever I think about it, I sort of counter-think my thinking. And here's what I mean. I always, when I look into examples of crafts and the development of crafts around the world in all these special places, they were very environment specific. So there's a reason why igloos were built where they were, and there's a reason why, you know, thatching happened when and where it did. And there's, of course, a kind of this kind of limiting framework of the environmental forces, the location on our planet, the type of climate, the type of culture, the type of civil, you know, the type of sensitivity towards the weather. And I think in our insensitive, often insensitive, globalized world, we've sort of lost connection to those very elements that made the tuning into nature so very much part of our lives. And there's air conditioning, you know, air conditioning units all over the Western world, which sort of disconnect us from the weathering system. And so I think we've lost something in the Industrial Revolution, which we now need to sort of reconnect with and recapture. And I absolutely think you're right. There is so much there to learn from. And so when I say to myself, the only problem is scaling. We just need to take that wonderful weaving approach and scale it up to a skyscraper in New York City. But then this ideal breaks down, of course, because the reason why they were so successful is partly because they were unscalable. And so I think it's interesting to think of the circular economy as such, as a circle where you sort of, you have to ask yourself, am I looking at the circle as a whole? Because when you look at only a portion of the circle, of the arc that makes the circle, you're sort of on a line, right? You're actually capturing a linear system that exists in in a sort of a macro circular system. So I think that the opportunity here is to maybe connect with all these beautiful vernacular case studies and see how we can sort of reinvent, revisit them in the context of technology, making them relevant to to everyone. And
yeah, I mean, there is a romantic aspect to all of this, no question, but you know, there is also an emotional connection to nature, which means there is a basic joy just going out and picking the apple from your own tree. So there is a notion of breaking barriers, and I do agree they're not necessarily scalable, but that's why we love them, because we're privileged enough to enjoy it. But if that's the only choice you have every day, then you're not going to appreciate it the same way. So yes, there is an element of romanticizing these aspects when it comes to vernacular thinking, but you know, it's a force that's been sort of handed over to a large group, a large number of inhabitants in this world, which they did not ask to have. So in a way, we're facing this dilemma, and we are really in the times of dilemmas, I think, to a much larger extent than before, hence complexity.
But when the apple disappears from the tree, it's also a joy, right? It's something that we accept because we are born with that idea that the apple will exist for the 3 months or so, and then there is the season of apple picking, and that's the end until the next spring or the next season in which that plant grows. So there is sort of, in that romantic ideal of nature, there is this notion of acceptance, which we don't have when applied to technical materials. The iPhone should be there at all times, 24/7. It can never disappear. It can never be decomposed. There's this kind of a culture of, to use Paula's hated word, consumption, that gets in the way of appreciation. And we sort of don't have, I think, the same expectations from the bio cycle as we do from the technical material cycle in this economy.
No, you're right, and we don't, because we need the iPhone to recognize what type of apple it is. So, you know, in a way, we've moved ourselves into certain...
to eat it for us.
Yeah, or find the worm, you know.
Gain the knowledge.
Yes.
You know, I think that, I'm sorry. In this time when we're questioning everything, we should also be questioning this idea of scaling, which is a industrial revolution continuum. And I'm not sure, I think we should be at some point discussing what does scaling look like in the future? Do we need to scale everything? Can things be done in different kind of production mindsets?
I think that's very, very, very crucial. And we've been talking about conceptualism since the 60s from an art perspective, and then all of a sudden that's starting to get combined with contextualism, and all of a sudden you have conceptual contextualism, which then means you have to have an idea, but it has to be contextual. And all of a sudden you're combining these big ideas of possible technological development, you're looking at biological development, but you're doing it in a smaller context. So I agree with you. Scaling is not necessarily a measure for how these things actually survive long term.
Yep. I think if we state that, we might think differently about how we solve things.
And Ivy, at your scale and level, what kind of differences have you seen your material choices make?
Oh, we are, by using fabric that has been made from using PET from consumer bottles, and we've seen people actually embracing that idea that, at least for starters, we can take things that would have ended up in waste and use them to make other products. It has sparred on the designers and the whole company, engineers, it's a cross-functional effort, wanting to do more. Like, we keep setting goals, again, very basic, but recycled plastic, what %? Let's go even further. What can we do next year? We no longer, we make bottles, fabric out of recycled bottles. Now I think it is time to actually create materials from scratch instead of just using them from recycled materials, and can they be biodegradable? So I think I'm proud of just at our scale, starting the conversation and pushing the momentum. We've hired more material engineers and scientists, because I do agree we have to grow new materials with new solutions in mind. So we are at the beginning, but we are all very committed to pushing the agenda forward. But I think simultaneously we have to have these conversations at this conceptual level, because we have to know where we're going. I mean, I'm someone that likes to have a North Star of putting a stake in the ground that is a little outrageous, and working together to do that, because right now I don't think there's enough audacity to what we are looking to do. And I think that has to come from a different group of thinkers. And then I would love for industry to get together and solve some of these problems as well, because I think it's going to come from some collaboration.
I think
I know the just sorry, this is a complete aside, but I just urge everyone to copy the chat, because there's been some fabulous points. Yeah.
No, sorry. I was just saying, you know, my biggest wish for tomorrow is to be able to convince one production company to produce an EPD, environmental product declaration. So I know the CO2 content of that product. Because if I don't know it, I will have to calculate it myself by the research that we're doing here in our practice. And it makes a big difference whether this product's been produced by oil, coal, or clean energy. So one of my few steps, which we're dealing with on an everyday basis when it comes to material choices, is environmental product declarations coming from the big producers. And they have to take a manifestation at a certain point by saying, okay, this product could not defend its EPD. So out it goes. Don't ever look at it again. So come back and looking at energy consumption, looking at complexities, looking at biodiversities, and looking at bioproduction lines when it comes to materials is, of course, a necessity, because we also need to reduce the CO2 footprint of the materials that we're using.
I'm afraid somehow we've run out of time. It's been incredibly insightful discussing. Thanks to everyone for their time. I mean, it's crucial to keep this conversation moving forward. So if there's any last bits of advice to the audience of how to help and how to move things along in the industry.
Well, I would love to just end with a Desmond Tutu quote, which says, "Do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world."
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's really, truly beautiful.
I just subscribe to that. And, you know, don't be afraid of getting political ever.
No, let the sun in. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'm reading, catching up on all the chat conversations. They're great. Maybe I'll summarize. I've had a funny conversation with one of my colleagues, newfound colleagues at the Weizmann Institute, Ron Milo, who shared with me that this year, actually 2020, is the year where anthropomass, all mass that is embedded in man-made, women-made products, has surpassed entirely the amount of biomass on the planet. And that's a very, very sad moment and critical. And I hope it serves as an awakening. One of the examples he gives is sort of to be able to present the problem is he gives comparisons between biomass and anthropomass. So I'll just end with a question and see some of the answers in the chat. Do you know how many rhinoceri are equal to the mass of the Eiffel Tower in France? The big, rare, almost extinct white rhinoceri. So any idea? Just looking at the chat. Yeah, 10, 40, any, any other takers? 300, 155, 100, 70. So it's actually 10,000. 10,000, the Weizmann Institute, Martha, in Israel, 10,000 white rhinoceri. And just when you think about the scale of this incredible animal compared with this incredible structure we've built in Paris, it sort of gets you thinking about the power of mass when placed in the context of energy and information. And I hope this can sort of awaken a new sensibility towards the units that we can't see or even count. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, co-panelists. Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
And thank you, audience. Thank you, audience. Ciao.
Thank you to the audience. Thanks so much.
Amazing.